We are honored today to have representatives from some of these leading countries speaking about the applications of blockchain in their countries. So I invite our panelists on stage. I welcome on stage Mrs. Marloes Pomp. Marloes is the blockchain program officer of the Dutch government. She has herself initiated over 36 pilots of blockchain applications in the Netherlands. Please give her a round of applause. Welcome to Bangalore, Marloes. Our second speaker closely involved in Dubai's blockchain story is Mr. Sakhr Irikat. He is blockchain evangelist with IBM Dubai, and IBM, as we know, is a core partner in Dubai's blockchain story. Welcome, Sakhr. Also his first time in Bangalore. Thirdly, from the Indian perspective, we welcome Mr. Alek Sharan of the Niti Aayog. Alek is officer on special duty to the CEO of Niti Aayog, Mr. Amitabh Kant. Niti Aayog has been looking closely at blockchain, and they have a strategy paper coming out. And I finally welcome the chair of our panel, Mr. Guru Maladi, senior partner at Ernst & Young, and he leads the firm's efforts on emerging technologies. He was also closely involved in the development of Aadhaar and many other technology innovations in government. So great round of applause. A very warm welcome to all of you. And it's over to you, Guru, for this interesting session.
Thank you, Tanvi. Good afternoon, everybody. I think in the last session, for those who were sitting here between 11:30 and 12:30, if you own cryptocurrencies, you've pretty much lost about $10. But if you're stuck to that coin, cryptocurrency the last 24 hours, you probably made 10% gain, right? So that's the definition of volatility. If anybody has a better definition, I'd like to meet them after the session that we have. So thank you very much. It's a privilege to be part of this panel who have not just talked about theory of blockchain, but also have seen this in action and also are willing to share those stories with us more openly. The last time, after attending all these conferences, you have these badges that I have a habit of hanging them around at home. And so my mom noticed that last few months it's been largely either crypto or blockchain is the title that read. So she actually asked, so what is this cryptocurrency? And I tried to explain with all my technical prowess, and then she asked me if she can buy a pressure cooker with that cryptocurrency. So I then realized that I need to now shut up and move on, and let's talk about blockchain. And therefore, we owe to each other on this panel that we're not going to talk about crypto. So what we're going to focus on is one of the foundational technologies of crypto, which is essentially blockchain. And I've been one of those who struggle to code databases, if any of you have experienced that, particularly the relational databases, in a time when they were called distributed databases. So distributed is not a word that we hear for the first time now. We've heard that for almost 20 years, right? So I think what our attempt in the next hour or so, including some of the time that we would like to spend with you in terms of question and answers, is to, at one level, sort of demystify what this technology that we're talking about. And at the second level, to talk about what are those meaningful prototypes that we're seeing, are the use cases that have been at work, particularly looking at government, and that's the public sector is the topic that we have chosen here, as to how can it improve the functioning of public sector within. And the third dimension that we'd like to explore is how do we use this technology in terms of improve the interaction or the interface that we have with various stakeholders that are various public sector agencies that we have. So those are the three themes that we thought we will explore. Happy to take any questions thereafter. So without much ado, I think you probably have the largest experience of spinning 35 use cases in a more practical way. Would you like to share with us how has the journey been and how difficult it is to work being part of the government and promoting these use cases, convincing various stakeholders? So how has the journey has been so far for you?
First of all, thank you for having me. It's really an honor to be part of your blockchain journey. I work at the I'm the program officer of 35 blockchain projects at the Dutch government at this moment, and I also am responsible for the international strategy of the National Blockchain Coalition. It's a collaboration between government, universities, and corporates. So I have now experience for, I think, 2 years. It's a lot in the blockchain space, but actually it's nothing at all. The longer you work on blockchain, the more you understand you don't know so much, actually. But first, let me explain how it all started. I trained the top management of the Dutch government, and I trained them in new technologies. So, for example, artificial intelligence, robots, etc. And they really liked the part when I talked about robots or drones, but I didn't like the part about blockchain. They didn't understand it, and my first reaction was to explain harder how blockchain works, and they didn't like it anyway. And after a while, the media, there was more attention for blockchain or Bitcoin actually, and they asked me, can you please give us another blockchain lesson? And I did learn from my first failures, so I said, no, I won't explain it to you again. Let's do some pilot projects. And I had 2 or 3 projects in mind, but yeah, within a week I did have 15 projects, and now blockchain took over my whole life. I really love other technologies, but everybody wants a blockchain at this moment. In the Netherlands, we started with some use cases to explore how can we use blockchain for this, and how, what can blockchain add to the process. At this moment, we have a lot of different kind of projects. Some projects are very small and simple, and you can implement it already. But we also have a lot of projects who are more complex. For example, digital identities or some healthcare projects, or so it's a combination. And we are still learning. I learn every day, and we also face problems every day. For example, the manuals for the developers, they are outdated, even though they just exist for 2 weeks. So it changes really fast. We also have some problems when we implement some projects. For example, we implemented a blockchain project for subsidies in a municipality. And the day we launched that project, the crypto kittens came into existence. And the whole Ethereum network slowed down on the day we launched our project. So every day new problems, but uni teams will try to solve that day by day, and we're still learning.
Thank you, Marius. I think one of the things that we haven't heard in the introduction is that she's been recently to India as part of a delegation between Dutch and the Indian government, and I think she's also going to teach the Queen of Netherlands about blockchain, who in turn is going to talk at the spring meetings in Washington. So moving on to you, Sakar. So given that you preferred being introduced as a blockchain evangelist as opposed to blockchain expert, so I think that probably has inherently a definition of how you see this blockchain technology evolving. So how do you define blockchain technology?
Thank you for this, and I hate to reiterate it because you've heard it many times before, but it's an absolute honor and a pleasure to be sitting here in front of you and talking to you about something that 2.5 years ago people were shunning us, saying, hey, what are you talking about when you talk about blockchain? And yes, although I've been dealing with this for 2.5 years, people try to introduce me as a blockchain expert. I vehemently reject being called a blockchain expert because the only thing that I see when reading more about this is that anything I knew can be thrown out within weeks, without exaggeration. If you don't read into this more and more and more and continuously, then you're going to miss the next bus. So sometimes if I don't read for a week, I find myself not caught up to the things. So yes, I like the concept of blockchain, and I don't believe I'm a blockchain expert. Now the concept of blockchain, I like it because it goes to the foundation of what we speak about, right? Because blockchain and its key concepts is just taking us back to the absolute basics of trade, the basics of transactions, right? We're talking about doing what we're doing, but we're talking about doing what we're doing suddenly, rather than using a contract, we start using a smart contract, which essentially just is a contract codified, right? Because why do I need a contract for every time I buy and sell a house if the terms and conditions essentially are the same? So we're using a smart contract. That's the first concept of blockchain. The other one is shared ledger. So ledgers, again, aren't something new. They've been around. Ledgers are in your shops, ledgers are in the hotel, ledgers are in our financial records, and we're talking about now using shared ledgers, okay? And last but not least, so the next concept is that we are talking about something called consensus. And consensus is nothing but us agreeing. Because let's assume in a real world example, if I want to sell Marlos my car right now, while we're sitting here, I just need to give her the key and take the money in return. That makes you the owner of the car. So once we agree that a transaction has happened, that transaction becomes real. And last but not least, we're talking about privacy. So we're talking about this technology that touches the core foundations of the way we transact. And I firmly believe, and which is why it's even more of an honor and a pleasure to be sitting here in front of you, I firmly believe that this is going to change the way we transact with all kinds of data, all kinds of assets. I think that blockchain is going to do to transactions what the internet did to data.
So, looking at the various aspects that you've discussed, so one of the things that's going on in my mind is that if majority of the characteristics of this blockchain technology today is merely a continuum of what we probably have seen, which is of a different nature, but fundamentally delivers the same output, are we justified in calling this as some sort of a revolutionary technology that's going to change the future of humankind?
I like that question, and it wasn't a planned question for everyone here. I really do like this question because, and maybe a lot of people disagree, because I always represent my own point of view before anyone else. I don't represent Dubai's point of view or IBM's point of view. And I don't believe it is this foundation, this disruption to the world as we know it. No. It's taking the basics of what we know, and it's providing us a new foundation to do what we do today in a more efficient manner, in a more secure manner, in a faster manner. And to take one of those examples, in Dubai, for example, they said that we want to start using blockchain to use for paperless transactions. And they did a back-of-the-envelope calculation about how much paper is being used, for example, when you renew your residency or when you register a vehicle or if you register a property. And they came up with a number on the back of the envelope, again, a calculation, that annually they'd be able to save $1.5 billion just in regards to going paperless and in regards to efficiencies. And then in Dubai, because there is the highest tower in the world, which is Burj Khalifa, they then start comparing everything to Burj Khalifa, which gives you the height of 6 Burj Khalifas if you would just stack the paper on top of each other. So, no, I don't believe it's that global disruption. No, it's a foundational change. Please.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the disruption will be a combination of technologies, a combination of IoT, artificial intelligence, and blockchain. And that's also why we, in the Netherlands, we try to do more projects while using a combination of those technologies instead of just a blockchain focus.
Thank you, Marlos. I think that squarely takes me to the next question for Alec, who's not only looking at blockchain, but being part of Niti Aayog and special projects, he's also looking at much wider technologies, right? So, what is, so given that you're looking at our thinking both at the policy as well as at the implementation level in terms of how practical it is, so how do you see this playing out in India, particularly? And which are the technologies that you believe have to come together in making this huge success?
Right. So, Guru, I think we need to first go back to what you said earlier about de-jargonizing it, and I think that's a point touched upon by everyone. I think that's absolutely important in this case because, as he said, Blockchain gives you a foundational layer on which to, probably build a new economic social system down the line. It does not disrupt in the sense that it does not create a new business model that a company can quickly adopt and cut down costs and take over the market, right? Given that, we need to look at how strategically that's going to play out. How is that going to change our systems? And we need to do that in a dejargonized way. So the parallel I like to give here is, transfer control protocol of the internet, which was technology way back in the 1970s. That enabled people to think about how to transmit information via packets rather than through circuit switch networks, right? Imagine if I told you right now, if I tried to give you a use case for an app that, I can use a TCP-based system to predict where you are and hail a cab. That's what Uber does. But if you use that technique to sell it, nobody would buy it. Nobody would understand what it means. Right now, in the governance realm, I think, and even in the blockchain realm where it intersects, we are currently thinking about hashes, about the different techniques, and we need to get into detail about that. But first, we need to establish, as he said very simply, that it's a shared database which people cannot change, with no one entity can change. And that shared database has these use cases. And we need to internally elucidate that within the government. So as NITI's role as a knowledge hub for the central government and its partnership with states, that's what we're striving for in the first leg. We'll be publishing a discussion paper soon on this, which will invite comments on, and try and understand where we can apply this technology and what systems will it change down the line. Because going back to the parallel of TCP/IP, only when other companies took it up, right? One company couldn't have taken up TCP/IP. Only when the entire system took it up did it become viable for internet giants to come in and change the way we, buy things, change the way we live, basically, which has happened now. So we need to think about what we can do to accelerate that process, because I think everyone in this room recognizes the potential benefits of that. So we are taking an evidence-based approach. While doing this, making this draft policy, we are running a series of proof of concepts. We're working with stakeholders for the same. For electronic health records, we're working with the Ministry of Health. For land records, we're working with some state governments, where we aim to pilot that system. And over here also, there's a fine point, because when you pilot it, it's not just blockchain. Blockchain is not a panacea. There are certain laws that need to be changed, right? And you need to look at the core aspect of what you're doing. So, for example, in land records, it's not enough to just put the deed documents on a blockchain-based system. All that does is, reduce the probability of them being hacked. But the real problem in the land records example is that we have a system of registration and a land record of rights updation process, and these two are not interlinked. So blockchain can help interlink that, and how it can do that. So based on all these approaches, one idea that we are mooting is a sort of a national infrastructure for blockchain, which would leverage, as you said, some of the advantages we have. And we have many challenges being a huge country, as the Principal Secretary IT had also mentioned, and with various different states having their own laws. We also have some advantages as well, because we have 1 billion biometrics already online, which can serve as public identifiers. We have probably one of the most advanced mobile-based payment systems in the world, UPI. How can we leverage existing systems? We don't have to make everything blockchain-enabled, right? We don't have to start talking about identity being blockchain-enabled. We can leverage what we already have to build systems now, and so accelerate that process. And so that's, I think, the approach we're taking. We'll be coming out with these, with a position paper on this, and we'd invite all of your comments and your guidance on all of these issues.
Thank you, Alec. So coming back to you, Bardos, I think given that you have looked at 35 use cases in blockchain which are real, now clearly we don't have time to discuss all 35 of them, although we would love to. And I also gathered that you spent time in Singapore as well as in Dubai in terms of your multi-country engagements that you have. So, if I were to ask you, what are those top 2 use cases that come to your mind? I know, I'm asking you to do a difficult task, but you have to choose, right? 2 out of the 35, and more importantly, can you throw some light in terms of what is the process that you have adopted in terms of bringing them to the current state?
Right. It feels like choosing between my children. But I will give you different examples because I think you need a combination. You need experience right now to learn faster, but you also need to work on a more complex projects. Let's start with a more complex project. We look at the autonomous vehicles and how they can share safety and traffic information. We have sensors in the road, we have the cameras along the road, and we have the data from the vehicles. And can blockchain be helpful in sharing those information? It's a project, we won't solve it tomorrow, but it's interesting to think about those kinds of projects, because there you see the combination of IoT, because otherwise the car can't drive at all. You need the artificial intelligence to drive safely across the road. But you need also blockchain to make the car do its own payments or to share the information. But on the other hand, we work on more simple projects like subsidies. It's quite easy to implement those kinds of projects because the government is in control of those kinds of projects. So we also work on more simple projects where we are in control. But we also work on topics, it's more about who's in control of the data. And we believe we should be in control of our own data instead of the Googles and Amazons or Facebooks. And blockchain can help us to do that. So we also work on official documents on the blockchain, like birth certificates or educational certificates, but also on projects with healthcare data. And we try to figure out, can blockchain help us to gain a bigger goal? Give people access to their own data, and make them able to share it with other people if they want to. And an important asset to make that happen is, of course, digital identity. We call it self-sovereign identity. And it's more complex, but you must work on both kinds of projects. And the last example, sorry, I couldn't choose, is an example. We work with the Red Cross on a project to give people earmarked money when they need help. So not everybody wants a rice or a certain whatever. And we give them directly money, but they can only spend it on...
Is also the three-tier structure that Netherlands have adopted in terms of implementation, which is the central, provincial, and the municipalities. Do you want to share some of the details in terms of the structure of how these projects are executed?
Yes, in the Netherlands, the projects... I run 35 projects. They are run by the government itself, but we also have different field labs across the country, so we are not competing against each other. It's also a model that could work, but we are a very small country. So in some cities we have a field lab for logistic projects. In another city we have a field lab for financial projects. And above all those field labs, we have a blockchain coalition where we work on the common topics. At the government itself, we start with a certain use case, then we build new teams. We build a team with blockchain experts and the people from the government. So we don't think the government should only be an enabler and give money to the IT people or to the startups. Every project, I build a new team with people of the government and the blockchain experts, and then we try to figure out how will blockchain change the process. Do you really need blockchain, or do you need a combination, or do you, should you use something else? And after that, when we are, when we think the proof of concept has potential, we built a new coalition of companies and governmental organizations who are willing to invest in the next phase. So that takes a lot of time because they have to work together. And after that, we build prototypes and we test it in real life. The last part is by far the most difficult because building prototypes, I have more than enough prototypes, I have more than enough use cases and proof of concepts. It's all about can you make it happen and can you build real strong coalitions and not only technical projects. And sometimes it's really difficult because most of my projects, they need to cross a border. It's a collaboration between countries. For example, my birth certificate on the blockchain, I can't use it if I can't use it in other countries. So that's why I also work a lot on bringing countries together, and that's also why I'm so happy to be here. We should share knowledge and work together on the topics which are important for both of us.
Thank you, Marlos. Secretary, extending what Marlos has started in terms of creating the entire ecosystem. One of the things that we've seen is that, however critical that we may want to be about the role of the government in these efforts, I personally believe that if there was no government initiative, we don't have Google today. We don't have GIS for all that matter, right? So I think the fundamental research historically has been an investment from government or the public sector, and quickly thereafter, private sector adopts to that. So in terms of creating the ecosystem, how do you see, given your vast experience of traveling around 20 plus countries and also looking at blockchain engagement models for government, how do you see private sector shaping up to this challenge and be an equal partner with the government in this journey? So do you see a sort of a synchronous journey here, or do you think that it doesn't match with each other?
Thank you for that question, because I think what is important to adopt when we start thinking about blockchain is that it is an ecosystem change. And I was very happy to hear in the very first talks the government of Karnataka actually embracing that and understanding that this is an ecosystem change. And this is, if we want to bring that back to the steps that Dubai took, also the steps that Dubai has gone through, because the first thing that needed to happen was to say, yes, there is an intent, and that was somewhere around the end of 2015. Early 2016, you saw, and to your point, the government partnering with the private sector and with other public sector entity to create something called the Government Blockchain Council, right? So the the Global Blockchain Council, right? So the Global Blockchain Council was there thinking about, similar to what the government of Karnataka is doing, thinking about certain use cases, directed use cases. There, companies like, I think at the time Ernst & Young was brought in, Microsoft, SAP, IBM, plus government entities like the Road and Transport Authority, like the Health Authority, they were all brought in to try and define this level playing field together, understanding that it isn't something that one entity or one government or one private sector can do. No, no, no. It is something that needs to be done by the entire ecosystem. The continuation of that was that we saw proof of concepts and pilots coming out of that Global Blockchain Council, and quickly a definition of something called the Dubai Blockchain Strategy, where they looked at industry creation, efficiency, and thought leadership as being the leading factors in there. Now, parallel to that, so the Government Blockchain Council was probably early February, and then 9 months later, the Blockchain Strategy of Dubai came out. Now, at the same time, while this was happening, you started seeing startup incubators to feed that theme of industry creation. So you started having something called the Dubai Future Accelerators. The Dubai Future Accelerators were nothing but companies coming together with private sector entities and public sector entities to try and tackle those issues that are important to the people. Because quite rightfully so, and I heard it from the Honorable Minister and from other parties in the government of Karnataka, this is a people's technology. It needs to be a people's technology. There is not going to be a benefit if, let's say, an IBM or an Ernst & Young or whoever the company is says, we want to adopt it. Now, how does it touch my life, your life, the life of the farmer that is not interested in technology? So you had then, they started defining these citizen journeys. These citizen journeys looked at how the journey of a citizen will change with blockchain. So to summarize, because I could go on quite a lot about that, but the matter of the fact is it is an ecosystem change. It is not something that one entity or one government can do, and it's very important to accept that and start driving it in this way.
Sure. Thank you. So, Alec, in the earlier section, you talked about, the way how TCP/IP, for example, is adopted by private sector and therefore it become popular, right? So, asking with the same question, but from an Indian point of view. So, what is the activity that you see around?
Yeah, so as Sakar said, right, since it's an ecosystem change, I just like to draw one distinction here. You earlier said that, generally for all other technologies, we, private sector embraces it, then government embraces it. In this respect, it may be a little different. And the reason I say that is one particular company, if it adopts blockchain, is not going to see a transformational, change in its balance sheet, right? Unlike, for example, if you adopted an ML-based approach to solving a particular problem, you could suddenly go miles ahead of your competitors and make that the benchmark. So I think, this is sort of, if you're thinking about PPP model, it's more of a reverse, build, operate, transfer model, that something like that could be valuable here. Think of it as building a city, right? When you're building the trunk infrastructure for a city, the sewers, the roads, there really isn't any ROI on that, right? So I think initially to create that layer, our idea is if government can create that shared infrastructure layer initially, on which others can then come in and then build models under PPP where they also have an incentive for doing so. I think that's the way the ecosystem can slowly be built up in an India-specific environment. The reason I'm saying that is, for example, let's say you want to have an identity authentication mechanism on whatever distributed app you make. And you want it to be Aadhaar-based because it's the easiest solution available today. Now, if you didn't have this infrastructure, every single developer would have to go to Aadhaar and to become one of those agencies that can do that. But if you built a shared infrastructure in the beginning, then you could link that ecosystem to Aadhaar. And then anyone who came in would not need to do that again and again. So these are the kind of approaches I think we need to think of to reduce the friction for anyone new coming in and building anything, right? And it has to be private sector driven. It has to be, entrepreneurs, innovators who come in and build those things. Government cannot build the entire stack for you. And this is just the foundational stack, right? This is the bottommost layer and the most important layer. But then people have to come in and build UIs on top of that.
Thank you, Alec. So I'll just ask one question, Manoj, before we reach out to our audience for any questions, and then we can come back and summarize. There's always an interesting proposition that intrigued me, which is that if a humanoid, which is a robot, kills an individual, who to be punished? Right? Now, the reason why I brought that proposition is to ask the question that, anything that we do, particularly around newer technologies, and that's likely to have an impact on in the lifestyle of citizens, working at the government, and so on and so forth, also need to have a policy environment that really supports, an enabling environment within the government that basically promotes the usage of these technologies. So around these 35 odd use cases that you use, are there any use cases that demanded government to change either rules or procedures or policies so that it becomes easier for you to implement those projects?
Yes, in almost every project, I think.
Anything else, I would have been worried.
Yes, but in most projects, or the role of the government changes, or their job disappears. For example, we looked with the city of Rotterdam to a decentralized marketplace for, it's a kind of an Airbnb, but then a decentralized model. And we start working on that, and the municipality or the city, they want to collect taxes, tourist taxes. So when you build the smart contract, then you at a certain point, you start thinking about a transaction and how do we collect the tourist tax, and you write the code. And after that, you are thinking about, the first thought of the government is to collect the tourist tax first to themselves. But when you write further on the smart contract, then the tourist tax must go to the musea or a marathon or whatever. The tourist tax has a certain goal, and there's no, it doesn't make sense to first collect the tourist tax to the municipality and then give it to the museum. You can do it directly with a smart contract. So we have a lot of different use cases where we see the role of the government changing. But we see also a lot of processes where it's very important to have a government as a validator. For, whether it's a birth certificate, you need a validation of the government to make it official. Or we also have a project about the track and trace of gold. We want officials to verify if the mine where the gold is mined, if there's no child abuse or if it's a fair mine. So there's still an important role for the government to verify some steps in the process. But we also we are aware that many processes the government is responsible for now will disappear. But we can do other things, more important things than all the administrative and bureaucratic processes.
Sure. So on a scale of 1 to 10, if you have to assign a score for the importance of those changes for you to progress in your projects, how much score would you assign?
It's too difficult because I believe that what we think now, it's like the beginning of the internet. We started to use the internet as an online telephone book, and for me it feels all the projects I run now, it's like we're in the early days of the internet. So I expect within 3 years I will laugh about the projects I do now because
right, so I see that you don't want to commit to a number.
No.
That's fine. So with that, we'd like to take a few questions from anybody in the audience. Please, before you ask the question, if you'd like to point the person to whom you want to advance the question, please say so. Otherwise, one of us will take up the question.
I had a very generic question. The thing is, how can we establish trust with a private blockchain? And is private blockchain scalable as compared to public blockchain?
Would you like to take that?
So there are a variety of approaches you can use there that we have been examining, and there may be many more. So because I'm no blockchain expert, if Sucker isn't one, then I'm definitely like at the bottom of the pile there. So one approach is that if you have certain trusted nodes, right? That's not a trustless system. So you house the nodes in organizations that you can trust. That's the most basic approach. Another approach is that you have a sort of hybrid system, which is what we're examining, where the permissions layer can be stored on a public network, whereas the actual transactions happen on a private blockchain network. So that's also something that could work. And the third thing is that you can have two types of nodes, but I don't want to get too much into architectural detail right now. But you can have two types of nodes. One is a general node and an authentication node. And these authentication nodes only have to be in a trusted environment. The others can be trustless.
It's one of the points we are still learning, and you can also make when the government started using the internet, they started using the intranet. It was a closed environment. So it might be that private blockchains are the intranet. I don't know. Maybe we will use both, but it's still too early to really know how it will work out at the end.
All right, so the gentleman on the right side here.
Yeah, this is Nitesh Patil. So basically, India is a vast country. With respect to scale, it is enormous. So if I take use cases such as with respect to India, be it our public distribution system or land records or UIDI or the GST network, which has crashed many times in the recent past. So does blockchain technology has that capability to replace the technologies being used in these systems? Or
Yeah, so I'll probably take that and you can supplement that. Yeah, I think that's a classic question that we have in government, particularly when we talk about India, right? And being a bit nostalgic, if I were to go back to the days when we debated about what should be the structure of Aadhaar and its implementation, people said, okay, let's take 10% as a pilot, which is a bit of 120 million, right? If you go to any country around the world, and if you say 120 million, so that would be like 4 times the population of those countries. So that would be our pilot size. I think there is a valid concern around that point. And today, I think it is a reality that blockchain as a technology has its own limitations in terms of very heavy transactional systems to be built on top of it. So we have to recognize that this is an evolutionary technology. And when we look at cities like Dubai or Singapore or Netherlands, for that matter, I think what we must learn from them is that it is possible. So therefore, one half of the problem at least is solved as far as technical viability of the solution is concerned. And all that we need to do from an India point of view is to then juxtapose that on the numbers that we have and see, does it also work for India? Or if it doesn't, then what is it that the incremental work that we need to do in terms of making these technologies feasible? But I think luckily in the last, at least 5 to 10 years, if you were to go back to the whole e-governance history and various other projects that we have done in India, we have been able to successfully take the pilots that have been tried in countries like this, and we have adopted and we've made those technologies that are ours. And I think we figured that out. I'm fairly confident on that. Will blockchain be one of those technologies or not? I think is an endeavor that all of us are moving towards. Do you want to add? Yeah.
Just a small point on top of what Guru said. So a recent report suggested that governments or institutions in the developing world have more of a chance to develop themselves on blockchain because they lack this institutionalized legacy. Now, a good example of that, for example, is Ghana. Ghana is now one of the leading applications of blockchain in land registry. Why? Because the system in itself was not as advanced there. So one thing to embrace is that it will provide a change. How much of that change is going to be impacted by the government services as they are, or the government system as there is? I'll go back to what Marlo said. I think it's very early to say, but it has the potential to impact all of them, yes.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, please.
Hi, my name is Kaushik Shankar. I work with Cisco. So if you see with respect to the governance and also the service delivery context, from a data standpoint, the deployment / implementation of blockchain needs to be done first time right, is my understanding, because the data is immutable. Whereas if the framework, if you have any issues, you could always sort of maybe patch it up, and you have options to do that. However, from a data standpoint, it's immutable. So my question is specifically for Sagar as well as Ms. Marlos. What was your experience with respect to doing it first time right?
So I think
That is
that's
if you have done it first time, right?
yeah, that's the thing, and I would actually beg to differ. I don't think, and maybe Marlos has a different point of view. I don't think it needs to be done the first time right, and I don't think you actually have to sit there and wait until you have everything figured out. The matter of the fact is you need to figure out, or what we believe is you need to figure out the business case, the use case around it. I was very happy to hear the gentleman of SAP actually reiterate that point. You then look at a small POC, and I think if you look at the Netherlands, if you look at Dubai, if you look at Ghana, Estonia, they've all started like that. You then gain the experience from the proof of concept, right? And then once you figure out, or what we call start small, fail fast, right? You start on a small scale, and then you fail fast, and you learn from it, and then you stand up again, rather than figuring out everything else. And it goes back to agile development as well, right?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. So my question was more actually with respect to the data standpoint, not from the framework standpoint. Because when you do it with respect to the POC, you are basically focusing on the framework and how how scalable it is and what kind of data you're going to encounter and how well it's going to be. Okay, for instance, all the use cases, etc. But once, for instance, the POC succeeds, everything is all nice, and then you're convinced, you're convinced all the key stakeholders, and then you go ahead and you start the deployment. There are always going to be sort of surprises, and surprises with respect to the framework are relatively easy, but surprises with respect to the data and
Yeah. Sorry. Question. So let me attempt that question. and based on the conversations that we have had, most of the, so one, if you are doing a pilot on a blockchain, please do not make that mission critical, in the sense that you shut down all your transaction systems that you've been using so far, only to depend on what happens, particularly on the blockchain, right? So, so therefore, that's one, I think it's a common thread that I've heard. So therefore, you know there are parallel systems that are running, and this is, so if something goes wrong, you have a fallback. Now, if something goes wrong, as you have said, if it's a technological upgrade in a normal terms, there is always a recourse. But your question is that if that has an impact on the data, which is immutable, what will happen to that data? Now, frankly, I don't think, you know, would you like to give an answer to the question? No. Yeah, I think the best answer that we can give you is that just don't make that mission critical system, because we simply don't know how it works at this point in time.
And immutable doesn't mean irreversible, right? So that's also one thing. Immutable does not mean that once you write something wrong, you can't reverse it.
Yeah, I mean, the transaction is committed, but not the data, right? So you can always revoke the data as and when that you want.
You're going to have different sort of elements there, because, for example, for land registry, right, it cannot be totally immutable in the traditional sense of the term, because it has to be consonant with the constitution that we have, where we do have, for example, a land acquisition for a public purpose. So one entity does have to be able to mutate that data. So, you know, it has to be an approach which is specific to that use case. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Questions from the rear side of the room, because we haven't had really any questions from there. Yes, ma'am.
So my name is Rupa Duraswamy. The question is to Marlos. So your system is a centralized blockchain with the government? Is that how it is? Or the nodes are decentralized? How does
No, it's not centralized. Okay. We use private blockchains, public blockchains, different blockchains like Ethereum, Hyperledger, IOTA, BigChain, Bitfury. We don't care about which blockchain at this moment, but it's not centralized, because otherwise you shouldn't use a blockchain. It's cheaper. You shouldn't use a blockchain. It's cheaper to use a central database. So it's not centralized.
So the governments you're talking to are open to these kinds of discussions of nodes being anywhere and everywhere?
Sorry?
The governments that you're talking to right now, you're
Yes.
building relationships, and you are going to be suggesting that they also kind of work with your system.
Yes,
will
or
be
we can
using
use their system. I see different countries work on more or less the same topics.
Mm-hmm.
So whether we could share each other's prototypes and each other's experience, and when someone's successful, we can try to scale it up. And for example, in Belgium, there was a project about educational certificates, and I connected them to the government in the Netherlands to work together. And in Malta, in May, we have a conference, an educational conference, and we will bring 8 countries together to work together on this project. So sometimes we will use their blockchain or their prototype, but it's never centralized blockchain. I don't think a centralized blockchain does exist.
Yeah, so we really have time for, I think, one question. I'd like to take it from the rear portion of the room. Can someone get a mic there, please?
This question is to Marlos. I heard you being introduced as someone running 35 blockchain projects in the Netherlands. So the question is, will you help us find the next Dennis Bergkamp for Arsenal? Okay.
I'm sorry, can you please?
Okay.
Yeah,
That was, the fundamental question is, blockchain as a concept, will it allow a system to be built which is suitable for high volume transactions, like high rate of TPS? Will it allow you to do that as a fundamental concept of blockchain?
So his question is that the systems that you are building, will they allow to scale to high volume transactions?
Well, we are lucky we are a small country. We don't face that
They
problem
don't need
yet.
that many transactions.
I guess it will be something you must solve, and it's also something I hope to learn from India. I think you will be the first country who will learn how to really scale up. At this moment, in the Netherlands, we still find a way, and we don't have many issues with the scalability at this moment. Sometimes we have problems, but the next week it's solved. But I think here you will really face those problems, and I also expect you to solve them, actually. I'm very hopeful about that.
Thank you, Marlos. So that brings us to the end of this session. So I request my co-panelists to share maybe one thought that they have in their mind about an advice to the government of Karnataka in their journey in terms of popularizing this technology, and any advice to the private sector players that we have in the room in terms of your efforts towards making this successful. So Marlos, starting with you, one advice to government of Karnataka.
I think you should use this time of period before the technology is more mature to learn. And one of the ways to learn is learning by doing. So just start a lot of pilot projects, fail fast, and just try and enjoy the learning.
So Sakar, anything for the private sector?
Well, my advice would be to focus not on too much on the technology, but on the application of it. Where does it make business sense? Where will it actually impact people's life? Where is this use case that will actually change something? And along the way, don't listen to the people that will tell you it doesn't work. Think about not in 2 weeks when people will tell you it won't work. Think about in, let's say, 2 decades when this is the new standard. And continue on your journey. I think you've started the journey right. It's an absolute honor and a pleasure to be here. So I thank you once again to the government of Karnataka, to the organizers, and yes, continue.
Thank you, Sakar. So Alec, from your side, one advice to both government of Karnataka as well as to the private sector.
I think government of Karnataka, if they just keep doing what you're doing, this is excellent. I think the energy in this room, one of the first states to take this initiative and talk about blockchain at a public forum. I think this is wonderful, and Neeti would like to work with you to bring it to all of our states and at a national level. So, and for the private sector, I think I just echo what he said with the added, what Sakar said, and with the added thing that focus on focus not on the the limitations of each blockchain piece, because there are different types of technologies within blockchain, and they have their own limitations. So for instance, someone asked about scalability, but then there are other approaches, like BigchainDB is going from database to blockchain, right? But the core concept is the same. So just focus on the core concepts of immutability and signed transactions and the user need, and connect both of them, rather than get bogged down by one particular implementation of blockchain and then hear no's from all around you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alec. So I think in the end, it's very heartening to see senior leadership from the government sitting in the room, really listening to the panelists and see what is it that they can take back from it. So I think that's a huge commitment from the government of Karnataka and Ministry of IT. And I think if you continue to do that, I'm sure there is so much that will come in a new way. Just one suggestion, I think as you write your use case, when you complete your use case, if you replace the word blockchain with a database, and if it still reads the same, then please be mindful that you don't have a blockchain use case, right? So go in that direction. Let's not just automate things that we have done in the past using databases. Then the real value of blockchain will never be realized. So with that simple advice, I thank all my co-panelists, and I thank all the organizers, and thank you very much for this lively interaction.
Thank you, Guru, also for moderating this panel. Really great job. I would request the panelists to stay on stage. If Principal Secretary IT, Mr. Gaurav Gupta, could come up and give them mementos from the government side. To Marlos Palm, thank you. To Sakra Erica, thank you very much. To Mr. Guru Maladi. And to Mr. Alec Sharan. Thank you, everybody. We will now break for lunch and reconvene in 1 hour.